I love that you figured that out, Brigham, in terms of, how far apart you want this to be. And you've drilled down. You didn't just say, hey, it's adults, 18 and over. So many emerging franchisors, they just don't know what they're doing when it comes to territory. So they just make it easy on themselves and just say, here's the territory. It's adults 18 and over, and here's the population size. And the fact that you drill down so early in your franchise growth, I think is brilliant. So kudos to you on that.
Well, we misfired here too. My first location I put in North Scottsdale. North Scottsdale is like the Beverly Hills of Phoenix, right? Like it's like the nicest area. The average income's $120,000 per household, and consequently, you have large spread out houses. So when you have large spread out houses, the density is lower, and
Right.
because people are making 120,000 or more, they're not 20 years old, right? They're not the college student that's getting waxed and going out on the weekend. This is like 40-plus-year-old mom and pop, right? So
Mhm.
it's like you go home to your parents' house maybe, but it's not like the young crowd. And so I misfired on that one. That location's still open. It does phenomenal. It's profitable, it's good, but it does nowhere near my like ASU location,
Mhm.
right? Like the college location. It does much better in some of these other places. So it was a matter of figuring out who our clientele was. Income, which I thought was like super important in this business because you think med spas and spas
Right.
became much less of a driving factor in how we choose our locations over time.
Well, just to give the audience some update here on the numbers, you guys you're still emerging, but you're almost leaving the emerging period here of time for you guys. You have 86 franchise locations, and you guys are in 15 states, plus you have your 15 company-owned locations. So you guys have done just incredible in the last few years. What would you attribute that's really helped you in awarding franchises once you got past the friends and family side of things? How did you find those franchise owners?
Yeah, great question. So we didn't, there's like two modes of thought with franchising. Number one is go the broker route. And brokers account for, I would estimate maybe even half of the franchises that are sold in the country.
Mhm.
Um, Brokers are great. They are helpful. People looking for a business go to like a business broker, similar to a real estate agent, and they tell them a couple of good brands and they go forward with that. We didn't have the money for it. We were also a small franchise with a small startup capital. So our franchise fee wasn't high enough to pay brokers. So we couldn't go that route initially. So we went the old-fashioned route. We did organic stuff online. I was on a podcast every single week for like the second year. The first year in business, we just did friends. The second year of business, I was on the podcast every week. We hit the franchise expos. So like all the expos that
Mhm.
are like for franchise coming in. That I'll tell you, Frank, is extremely hard. We
Mhm.
would go to a show. We would talk to 1,000 plus people at these shows, giving the same speech over 2 days. It's exhausting.
It's a grind.
Um, but it's a grind. But every show we got one franchisee out of it, every single show,
Mm.
until a point where like the markets didn't coincide with what we're looking for, right? So we stopped having to go to those shows. But it was great in the beginning, and to be honest, like I'm grateful I did those because it helped me understand the brand. And so that's year two, and then it would be friends of franchisees because we had good validation. And then now this past year, we're looking at this and we're saying we're not necessarily, like you said, not we're on the cusp of not being emerging. We raised our franchise fees to be able to work with brokers,
Mhm.
and we are now selling 3 packs. And we're just starting this in the last couple months, where we'll go to an area, we'll do 2 suites, and then we'll work on the flagship at the same time. So within a 3 pack, you'd have 2 suites that are operational within a couple months. And then the flagship usually takes a year to get off the ground. So you'll eventually start working that out in the first 18 months. And within 3 to 3.5 years, you have 3 flagships. You're converting those flagships each year from the suites.
Let's talk about technology because I understand tech does play a pretty big role in your company. So why don't you tell us about this receptionless salons and AI powered customer service?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's a great lead in. In 2021, we were doing phones. And I'll give you little industry averages here, Frank. In the reception space, that accounts for 40% of all staff. So your reception is 40% of your staff. And the reason why is because they're all part-time. They're part-time, they're college students, they're minimum wage. They usually don't care about the business. They have more on calls and off sites, like they just don't no shows, etc. And it's a tough crew to manage because they don't always reflect your brand. right? Especially if
Right.
you're just hiring like low minimum wage. And they're minimum wage because they're a drag on the expense of the company. You have to have them, but they aren't producing revenue. They're answering phones, they're checking clients out, they're helping with the customer experience, but they're an ancillary service. I was looking at our phone calls and we were answering one in every three phone calls. And I
Ouch.
was like, this doesn't really work. And so everyone was against me on this, but I said, why don't we just stop answering phone calls altogether and just do text message? So every time somebody called me, I'd respond with, hey, we'll immediately text you as soon as you hang up. And we'd send them a text and be like, I'd like to book an appointment. And so then we had a receptionist in the salon doing texts. So we would handle all of the texts that came through.
Okay.
And then I would have some offsite people to assist with the volumes. But then it got to a point where I'm like, these on-site people are just like reading books and like letting the offsite people do it. So I'm like, do I even need them? So I fired the receptionist at one location. And what would happen was our sales went up like crazy because the person checking the client out was also the person servicing the client.
Oh,
And there wasn't a pass off. It's much easier to say no to a receptionist who doesn't care about the business than it is to say no to the person that was in your lady parts when you're naked on a table, right?
right, right.
So we sold like crazy amounts more. And it turned out to be a great thing. And so, it was a progression. Year one was let's start with offsite. Year two was let's get all of our tech down for automation. So like we had macros. Macros are like just ways to say things in the settings. And then last year, we had the opportunity to we could either afford to build an app or we could afford AI. I invested in AI. I thought that was a better use because it would hit more people than an app. And so we
Mhm.
invested $250,000 into AI technology. A lot of places say, hey, we do AI, but it's just like a chatbot. It's not actually AI. We invested in a large language learning model. So we built a wiki on our stuff. And
Mhm.
then the AI uses that wiki to respond to clients. And so it's a bunch of back and forth to just like update the wiki and update the voice that's being used. But we're at 64% automation today. So just to give you an idea, best in class in e-commerce is 70%
Mm.
automation. For us in a service business to hit 64% automation is insanely good. And this instant responses, people get what they need right away. They're much faster and much more likely to book an appointment. And you just train your clients not to use calls, but to text through.
That makes sense. So that really kind of brings me to the next thing then. Considering there's so much automation, and I assume your franchisees are not actually doing the treatments, who is your ideal franchise owner? And like, what do you think are the most important traits they need to be successful with the brand?
Yeah, I had one franchise owner and I thought of this like a military person, where he was a little rough around the edges, kind of like a hoorah kind of guy. And that doesn't work in a beauty business, right?
Right.
Like you kind of need a white glove approach. I mean, these are 23-year-old females that need a ton of praise. So it's a softer personality. It's someone who's nice to people, just genuinely nice, but also metrics driven, numbers driven, and obsessed about creating the customer experience at the highest level. I'd imagine it's very similar to franchises of most size, high customer experience, IQ,
Hmm.
and a good communication style can make a great manager here.
Yeah.
One of the things that makes us unique is we don't need a full-time owner. They can't be in the treatment room anyway, especially in a one-room suite. So most of our franchisees have a full-time job and are doing this on the side until they build enough locations that they can quit their job, which has been really unique. I mean, really to manage this, you need 5 to 10 hours a week. We don't have reception. That takes a huge place out.
Hmm.
We help hire managers for you overseas. So it takes down the cost of managing and it takes a lot of your time away. We do all the marketing for the franchisees, or like let's say 95% of it. If they want to do stuff on their own, they can, but most people opt to just let us handle it.
Okay.
So it's really a business in a box that is mostly handled for them besides the staff interactions.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fumey, or Emerging Franchise Group LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.